Hey folks, welcome back. It's your friend Lisa Mason Ziegler bringing to you the Field and Garden podcast. And friends, I have another of the Flower Farmer show that I do on Wednesdays over on Clubhouse at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. And if you want to join me live over there, you just need to download the phone app for Clubhouse. It's an audio social media platform. You don't get to really see anything, but it's conversations, and it's really kind of a lot of fun. And you can ask me questions and connect. And generally, I kind of chat for 15 minutes or so after we intro, and then I take questions. And I would love to connect with you over there. So today's episode was a day that I collected a bunch of the questions that listeners had submitted over on our designated Flower Farmer Show closed Facebook group that I host. So you can find that over on Facebook, The Flower Farmer Show. And that's where I get my inspiration about what I'm going to talk about. It's what we're talking about over there is typically what I may be talking about over here, and then taking your questions. So I invite you to join us over on Facebook at the Flower Farmer Show closed group. You have to answer a couple of questions, and then you will be granted access. And I would love to have you join us over there. And then if you want to join the live show, just get that app downloaded. You do not need an invitation to join Clubhouse. You just join and come on over and join my flower farming club. And I will put links to all of these down below in the show notes. So, friends, let's just take a listen to kind of what a crazy show that we brought a lot of questions and then we got a lot of questions. So maybe some of them might be your question. Let's take a listen. Welcome, everybody, to the Flower Farmer Show here on Clubhouse. My name is Lisa Mason Ziegler, and we're really glad to have you here. And I'm joined by one of our team members, Jesse, who is here to help me moderate. And so we really welcome you guys here. And today we have a great show because I have collected some of the random questions that you guys have been submitting over on our Flower Farmer Show Facebook group, the closed group we have. And so I want to jump into those. But before we do that, I want to remind everybody that this show is being recorded. So if you come up and want to ask a question, you asking to do that is giving us the okay that you say it's okay to record you. And I'm going to ask Jesse to kind of share with folks how they can ask their questions. We have a couple of ways. And I love for you to ask questions, y'all. So go ahead, Jesse, fill them in.
Yeah, okay. So if you've been on Clubhouse before, then you know that at the bottom of your screen, there's a little hand in a circle, and you can click that, and that raises your hand so that Lisa knows that you want to come up and ask a question, and you're welcome to do that. We usually save questions for like the last 15 minutes or so of the show. And another way that you can ask questions if you don't want to raise your hand and come up for any reason is to use the back channel texting feature. And if you're not familiar with that, that is also at the bottom of your screen toward the side there. It looks like a little paper airplane. And if you click that paper airplane icon, it brings you to a screen where you can type my name in, Jesse, and then you should be able to send me a text message through Clubhouse, and you can ask your question, and I'll ask it on your behalf.
Thanks, Jesse. Yeah, we go ahead. Sorry. So we really encourage people to ask questions. I mean, we really want to serve your needs here. So hopefully we will get some of those. So as I mentioned, I've gathered some random questions from our closed Facebook group, which is the Flower Farmer Show, that aren't really long discussions, but I thought we would just run through them here and see where it goes. So someone asked about how to get long stems on their flowers. And I think that's a really great question because so many of the flowers that we often see grown as cut flowers also are grown as landscape plants, which means they're much shorter. And so people don't always know that there's different varieties. So let's just take well, zinnias, because that's just such a popular and a lot of people know what that is. There are zinnias that only grow 8 to 12 inches tall, and then there's the zinnias that we grow, which are like 48 inches tall. So the real story is it's all about the variety selection that you make. And beyond that, if you are growing the proper varieties that do produce really long stems, then the other things that go along with that is growing conditions, adequate moisture, full sun, if that's what they require, proper nutrition. So all of those other things go along. But I feel like the biggest hurdle that most people have um, is getting the right variety. So you really need to seek out proven, this is what I do anyway. I only grow proven cut flower varieties. That means they have long enough stems, they aren't going to drop pollen everywhere, and they perform as a cut flower. So the next question that we got was, oh, y'all, this mowing, I'm so sorry. The next question I got was, how about using coleuses as cut flowers? And all I can say about that is that I have never done that. I have never tried to grow coleus. I have grown coleuses. For anyone that's not familiar, that's a very popular, typically shade garden foliage plant. It's not really grown for the insignificant flower that ends up growing on it. But I have read of other folks growing it. And the real challenge with that, I would think, would be hydrating it because there is so much foliage surface. So that would be really a try it and trial it before you would ever, of course, use it commercially for sure, right? And I would tend to think that those coleus varieties that have smaller leaves instead of those enormous leaves, because I've seen what it just so happens that one of my neighbors has a bunch of coleus in, and I actually, after seeing this question, kind of hawk-eyed it when I came home yesterday. And hers has enormous leaves, which would definitely, I think, be a problem to hydrate. So you might want to lean towards those variety um, when you're making an actual selection. So the next question was about sunflowers and about what fertilizer when you're prepping the beds. So we find that sunflowers are one of those plants that they really will take a lot of abuse. You know what I mean? They're very drought tolerant. They'll grow in kind of soil that isn't the greatest ever, but they definitely grow best when they get adequate moisture and adequate food, because sunflowers will really reward you when you feed them. And y'all, I keep walking around trying to get away from this noise. Really, um, what we do is all I can share with you, and we find that it helps us to get our sunflowers to maturity in a timely fashion according to what the actual like how the seed will say 55 to 60 days we grow pro cuts, and that's what their um, time is for them to bloom. But there's others that are longer. We have learned that by preparing our beds, we use a dry pelleted organic chicken litter based fertilizer. And you can actually find it on our website, thegardenersworkshop.com. We put that in the soil at bed prep. And the seedlings are fertilized weekly while they're in the tray for the 2 to 3 weeks. And we use the seaweed fish Neptune's harvest according to directions. Um, so that really makes a big difference. But as I said, it's because oftentimes when people post questions about this on social media, a lot of people will chime in and say, oh gosh, sunflowers, they don't need anything, they'll grow anywhere. Well, that is true. But the minute you start selling flowers, y'all, you want to get your flower to wherever you're taking it to market um, as quickly as possible from the minute you plant it. And adequate fertilization is really a big part of that. And then someone also asked, we make a special pro cut mix. We mix some of the colors, and the name of the mix is Fall Medley. And they're asking, do all of the colors in that mix typically bloom at the same time? And that's a really great question because one would think that, all being pro cuts, that they would just time it, perfectly together. But there can be some variation. And again, depends on your conditions, but we find that like there's probably a 3 to 8 day window when we plant a bed of that mix. And it really works out perfectly, especially if you're growing a lot of them. It just gives you a wider window in that bed. So that can vary. So this is the $1 million question, right, folks? Someone was asking about pricing. And this is probably in the top 5 questions that I always get. And I just want to refer everybody. I did do a podcast on pricing. And pricing is just not as simple as what particularly inexperienced business people want to think it is, of just saying to somebody like me, so how much do you sell yours for? Really, what I sell mine for has nothing to do with what you perhaps should be selling yours for. We're in different areas. We have different markets. There's different types of markets. And so really, I think the question that folks that don't know what to price or how to price their products, the question they should be asking more experienced farmers is, how do I learn to price my flowers? I will tell you that seasoned farmers will be more intrigued to help you with that question than you to ask them the simple answer to a question that could have taken them years to figure out, y'all. So I just wanted to, so there's a podcast that I talk about that. So I'm sorry I'm going through these pretty quick, but we're halfway through them. Oh, sorry, I had to reread this one. So someone was asking, what should a person grow if they only have a small space? And, my take on that is I consider myself a small space farmer. I mean, I'm in the middle of the city, I'm landlocked. We have our whole piece of property is a little less than 3 acres. And of that, like an acre and a half was in production. And that, led me down this road all these years ago that I started, as I recommend all new growers do. I never left that model. And that's the model of growing annuals. Annuals are the biggest bang for your buck. First off, you can get in really for a low investment and get a high return. And there's just so many benefits to doing that, particularly if you have a small space. If you have small space and you start planting a bunch of perennials and woodies, well, that's nice, except that they take up real estate year round and they may only bloom for a very short window, not to mention it's going to take them, particularly with woodies, years to come into production. And the method that I follow is those items are incredibly important to grow. But after you've already gotten in, learned how to farm, found some customers, get some experience, learn how to manage, annuals are always the biggest bang for your buck. And I grow 95% annuals 24 years later. I still grow annuals for so many reasons, because I did have such high volume needs, and we wanted to get the most out of every square foot. And here's the other thing, y'all, you get to grow such variety constantly. You're constantly getting to like squeeze in some new flower you just found because you've planted annuals. There's a constant succession planting going on, right? Um, so that is my take on that. And that's a method that I still follow to this day. And it has served me well. When we were in high production, which was for about 8 years, from our acre and a half cutting garden, we were producing 10 to 15,000 stems of flowers a week in season. No houses. I have no hoop houses or no greenhouses. And that was purely by living a seasonal, annual farming life. And it can really be done, and very successfully. Um, so someone was asking what a prepared fall bed is, and I didn't quite understand that question, but I will say that when we prepare beds in the fall for the cool season hardy annuals that we're planting in the fall, those that are winter hardy in my zone, as well as we prepare the beds for our very early spring um, planting. That means those very early springs are being planted 6 to 8 weeks before our last spring frost. So for us, that's Valentine's Day. Well, it is not uncommon for us to either have snow on the ground, beds frozen, or beds super wet, or the soil super wet. So you can't prepare at that time. But if we prepare in the fall, when we're preparing our fall planting beds, they just sit there and wait all winter. And that's another discussion. But that is essentially what we do. Um, so here's another really great question. And this is what a lot of people struggle with succession planting. And this really is kind of a succession planting question. They asked about they were trying to get a better understanding of when to know the end of life for cool flower beds, meaning when do you pull your cool season hardy annuals out next year after they've bloomed. Because what they had added is that, oh my goodness, I left one bed in because we never got to it to tear it out. And it's to here, we're in the middle of summer and it's still blooming. Well, that is very true. That can certainly happen. But the question for a professional flower farmer is not, is it still blooming? Is how many quality, harvestable, sellable, usable stems is that bed putting out? That's the big question. And that's where people really, and it's even hard for me sometimes, y'all. One of the videos that we share in flower farming school is I'm on a tractor and I'm holding the camera. And I always bush hog backwards. And I holding the camera and I'm bush hogging a late summer bed of zinnias. And from 50 feet away, the bed looks gorgeous. I mean, it looks like it's just loaded with blooms. But when you get up close, you can see that the bed is full of grass, which means grass seed is dropping on the blooms, and it just makes it difficult, more work to be able to use them. And some of them have blemishes. There's grasshopper damage, the classic late summer stuff. And that bed should be pulled out. It looks good at a distance, but is it really good? It might be good to a home gardener, but it's not good to a commercial flower farmer. So that is the big question. So couple more just really quick ones. How many stems in a bouquet? Depends on what your market is, but our standard market, farmers market bouquets used to be, we actually set our size at what the supermarkets were selling, kind of a comparison. Customers buy. I mean, if you're a flower farmer and you haven't gone and stood in a supermarket and watched how many people grab bouquets of flowers and put them in their cart, it's pretty dadgum amazing. It's a real learning curve and lesson. But we pretty much would gauge our bouquets at the diameter of a soccer ball. That's kind of the size. And the number of stems to make that can vary depending on the flowers you're using and the time of the year. So we would typically, when we were selling those same type bouquets to supermarkets, we would put a stem count of 12 to 17 stems. So when the stems flowers are really big, there'd only be 12 stems, but sometimes of the year there might be up to 17. So we use the soccer ball size. So somebody asked about straw flower harvest stage. Straw flowers are incredibly popular. It's actually one of the top selling flower seeds on our store. Um, and we all tend to want to cut them too early. You do have to wait for them to develop. And a lot of times people using them for dry work, for dry flowers, um, actually put wires in them. But we only use them fresh, and we allow them to open completely before we cut them. And then I'm going to finish up with this question. Somebody asked, what is the potential dollars to earn um, from being a flower farmer? And that is a question that's as wide as the world is full of people. Totally depends on where you are, what kind of market you're selling in. I mean, are you selling a farmer's market or a florist or wholesalers, or you're doing, the top dollar you can make selling your own flowers is by being an event florist. And Jenny Love. So I'll tell you what Lynn Bazinski says in her book, the one that started so many of us, right? Is that she said that from 1 acre, it is totally reasonable to think $20,000 to $30,000. And I'm not sure whether Lynn was talking gross or net. And because I didn't look it up in the book, somebody had actually answered that question, had added that. But Jenny Love, on just one of our recent interviews with her, she's one of our instructors, and we were talking about the whole farmer florist situation. And she very boldly shared that she nets $100,000 a year from her couple acre farm, but that is strictly because she is an event florist. So it's hard work, but you can definitely reap the reward. Um, and there is so many opinions on that, you guys. That's a wide open question. It depends on how good a farmer you are, how good a marketer, how good a business person you are. How do you overspend? There's lots of things. So with that, I'm going to open this up to questions, and I don't see anyone's hand raised. So Jesse, did you get any questions on the back channel?
Yes, actually, I have several. Let me start with Ginny. She says she's having trouble with her snapdragon germination. She has them in a 65-degree room on a heat mat, and she's wanting to know if she should have put the seeds in the freezer for a bit.
Okay, that's a great question. This is certainly the time of the year that a lot of people are trying to start snaps. So the way that we start snaps is what I can share with you. I don't know if you're soil blocking or using cell packs, or I mean a plug tray, but it sounds like the temperature in your room is dead on. And you're using a seedling heat mat. That means if it's a built-in thermostat, that it should pretty much be hitting the right temperature. And so snapdragons are sown on the surface of the soil because they do need light to germinate, and that predisposes them to drying out really quickly. And so we use wide weave burlap. We just lay it on top of our soil blocks, and that helps to trap moisture, but yet it doesn't trap the moisture enough that it really encourages disease, which, I've never been a dome user on trays. Sorry, y'all. And so we have really excellent germination on our our snaps, when we have added that, and it just helps it to retain moisture. Hope that helps you.
Okay, should I go to the next one on back channel?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so this one is from Jessica, and she says, what does everyone think about longer versus shorter beds? I'm making a new plot now, and I can either do some 50-foot long beds, or I can make about 3 times more beds if they're only 20 feet long. The longer 50-foot beds would be oriented east to west, and the shorter beds would be north to south orientation.
And that's a really great question. And that is one that we hear often. And I do not have a technical answer for you. I can just tell you from personal experience, my beds are oriented for efficiency. To get the most square footage of bed space out of my garden, and then how we get irrigation to the heads of the beds, then where do we put the harvest wagon when we're harvesting, and then how many steps from our building. So, I'm assuming if this area is out in full blasting sun, for at least 8 hours a day, um, I don't have, I mean, I've done them both ways on my farm. I don't have an opinion of east, west, or north, south. Um, and so it's really about your efficiency and then also what size grower you are. If you are a small market grower and you're only growing, 20 feet of a particular variety, there is definitely benefit in having one full bed of a variety instead of having a 50-foot bed that has, two and a half 20-foot sections that might not be harvested all at the same time or ripped out at the same time. So I like longer beds personally. And I would say orient them to what is the efficiency for you. And then the other thing that I try to keep all of my beds the same length on my farm so that everything's interchangeable. All the row cover and all the netting. We don't reuse irrigation just because I use a tractor implement to make the beds. But that just helps with that part too. Thank you for that question, Jesse.
Okay, so next one is from Tori. She's wanting to know about shade tolerant and deer resistant flowers or filler that she could use in bouquets. And she's hoping to grow something additional to benefit her bouquets in that space.
Okay. So, again, speaking from experience, I will tell you that hellebores are a huge cash crop for us. If you're not familiar with them, you definitely need to look them up. They grow in deep shade where nothing else wants to grow. They are deer resistant. Um, and we actually use the leaves as foliage filler, as well as the stems of flowers are one of our top demanding cash crop. And for florists and in our own bouquets as fillers. So definitely would recommend hellebores. I don't really grow a lot of other I mean, of course, there's lily of the valley, but I would say is in a big picture crop that not only is evergreen, so it's really great to grow in the shade. It offers great benefits by offering foliage and stems with flowers. So hellebores would be my vote for that.
Okay, I've got two more back here. I've
Okay.
got one from Sarah. She said to thank you for all your great courses. And she's wondering if you have tips for keeping celosia and strawflower from getting slimy in a vase. She is conditioning with CVBN overnight and then using flower food after that. She says she changes the water daily and trims the ends every second or third day, but she's still having that issue.
Huh. Okay. First, I'm going to invite the three hands that were raised to come up. So when Mary, Amy, and Janet, when you come up, if you'll mute yourself, and we will get to your questions in just a moment. So, slimy stems. I mean, I'm not sure if she has anything else in that vase. I would definitely be suspicious of a zinnia or something being in there, but it certainly at some times of the year There are, things that happen in stems. There's insects that are in there that can cause problems. Sounds like she's doing all the right stuff. I would definitely isolate and like have a vase of celosias, have a vase of straws, um, and do what she's doing, meaning pre-treating with CVBN, which we use those in all of our harvest buckets, and then using flower food in the vase, and see what happens, and see if she can figure out, is it the celosia or is it the straw flowers, and then you can probably maybe track that to a disease or a pest, perhaps. So
I
hopefully that.
was, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just going to add one more quick thing about those particular flowers, just in case.
Sure.
Um, so it seems like both of those flowers, they have a lot of foliage down the stem. And I would just say, make sure you're getting all of the plant, all of the leaves and little sprouts and things off of the stems before you get them in the water. Even out in the field if you can, just make sure the stems are super clean on those.
Thank you, Jesse. That is a great point that I didn't even think about. But for sure, there should be no foliage at all in the water. So I am going to go ahead and ask Janet. You can unmute yourself and ask us your question. And thanks so much for coming up.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Janet. Thanks
There
for
we
coming
are.
up.
Okay, you're welcome. All right, so I'm in 5B 6A zone, and I've sent a soil test off, and it may be a week before I get it. I know probably the best thing to do would be to add the amendments and then sow the seeds, but am I getting too tight on my timeline? Should I just sow the seeds and then maybe side dress with amendments?
Okay, that's a good question. So, Janet, what is your first expected frost date?
October 15.
Yeah, so you're getting close. You're at your planting time, and I would say to you, if you are not suspicious of a deficiency, I would guess that maybe this test is for your entire garden, not just for where your cool flowers are going. I i would move ahead with using the standard general organic fertilizer that we add all the time. No matter what a soil test says, we always add just a general purpose organic fertilizer. And then if you're feeling the pressure of, planting, then you could, like you said, side dress. But um, I would say probably move ahead with your direct seeding. Are your transplants ready to go in the ground, or are you still growing them?
Not yet. My snaps are up about, oh, maybe an inch.
Yeah.
And I've
Um,
started Rudbeckia.
all right. I think that there would be merit in waiting, but I think if you just did follow the normal steps of adding a general purpose fertilizer, if you don't suspect any deficiencies, prepare your beds and move forward as you had planned. And then the rest of your garden, if you need to apply lime or something like that to the rest of your garden, do that at a later date. But yeah, this is one of those wake up calls. It's like, oh gosh, you should probably write on your calendar for next year to send your soil test in July, right?
Yes, yes.
So that's why we live off of that big calendar, because stuff like this, you just don't even think about it, right? Until it's time. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, I don't have enough time to either receive the seed or, get my soil test. So that's what I would say, Janet. Just move ahead as you normally would, um, and see what the test comes back. Thanks for your question.
You are welcome. Thank you, Lisa.
All right, Amy, unmute yourself and what you got for us. Welcome.
Hey, Lisa. My question has to do with no till versus till. We are in zone 5B, 6A as well in Indiana, in the middle of corn and bean country. And our soil is very hard clay. My question is, with you having your year of no-till in a section of your garden, would you feel it would be more beneficial for me to plant a cover crop in a new area, or just start like a no-till bed on top of it and just let it slowly work its way down into that clay?
So that's a great question, Amy. And, I'm still experimenting with, so probably a third of my farm is in no till. And I'm trying really hard to figure it all out, but it's hard to do that when you're full fledged already farming. But I think your point is well taken that, first off, if you don't have any prepared garden space, space available to you to garden or farm in? Are you breaking new ground everywhere, or is this an add-on spot?
This is an add-on. I call, like, this year was my practice year, just learning how to do things. And I've grown a vegetable garden for a long time with raised beds, but raised beds are not economical if you're going to be a commercial farmer. So we are going to be breaking new ground this fall in our front field, which is basically a hay field right now.
Okay. So, I'm going to say to you that what we did when we built our no-till beds is we brought in pallets that were actually gifted to me of a compost soil mix. I know you can buy that also by the dump truck load.
Okay.
And literally built our beds out of that. Just made them. We just created, they are raised beds. They don't have sides on them, but they are elevated beds, and built about 4-inch tall beds. And then just went to farming, planting in them, and we leafed the pathways, which really also helped to build the soil. And I would say to you a really interesting thing, and if you feel like, because that's a lot of hard work,
Yeah.
it's the building the beds and maintaining those beds. You have to kind of have specialized equipment to do that. And as a conventional farmer for all these years, all of my equipment is conducive to, tilling, plowing, flail mowing, and all of those types of things with a big tractor, not a big, but a pull tractor. And so I would say to you that if you had the opportunity to make, however many beds you feel like would really get you a start as a first year flower farmer, which I wouldn't think that you would be planting 2 tons of stuff yet. You're still
No.
getting your feet wet, right?
Correct.
To build a few no-till beds, and then in the additional space, grow a cover crop. Get started building that garden for next spring, for either, for that first spring planting of warm season tender annuals. And how your plan goes with your no-till of building it, figuring it out, how to do it, will deem whether you're going to be making more no-till beds in the spring, or you're going to say, forget this, or we'll maybe try it in this spot just like I'm doing, keep those those beds going, but we still use a tractor in other parts of our garden. And I hope that helps. I know it wasn't very definitive, but it is not a cut and dry question. And I find that no-till, as much as some of my good friends tell me that it's not as much work, um, it is for me.
It is
The way
a lot.
we're doing it, it's more physical work.
Yeah, because we have our normal, like, framed in raised beds for, like, produce, but we did a few raised beds just in a little triangle area off of our regular garden, um, in raised beds. And I have 4 teenagers, and we were pooped by the
Yeah.
time we got just a few rows in.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is a lot more work than you think, and it takes a lot more soil than you think it'll take, or compost, or whatever you want to call it.
Right. And I guess
Definitely.
that they say the reward comes. And that, so I'd be interested to hear back from you, Amy, how that goes for you. But that would be my take, is to tick your toe in a little bit on both sides of that. And thanks for
Okay,
coming up and asking your question.
no problem. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, Mary, you got a question for us?
Yes, I'm sorry I couldn't figure out how to mute myself a minute ago, so I'm glad you
That's all
muted
right.
me. Thank you. Okay, so the whole no-till and everything, that kind of plays into my question because I've had a garden for a while and I want to convert it to flower farming. I've got 12 4 feet by 24-foot long beds. Most of them have boards on the side, and I'm just going to kind of do what you're doing, I think. But the whole thing of building the beds is incredibly hard work. And I've looked at your Cool Flowers book and it gives detail on page 40 and 41. So that's when you're starting a bed. And I do have hard pan. I got the broad fork that you recommended and I'm getting going on this. But that's once I build the bed in that way and I put it to bed, add my amendments, plant seeds or transplants, whatever I'm going to do with Cool Flowers and leave it for the winter. When I start up next year and say after the cool flower crop is finished and I take that out, then I cut all of that off and then you till it in and then you just add fertilizer. You don't totally rebuild that bed at that time and add 4 more inches of compost that you've had delivered or whatever, do you? That's
Correct.
where I'm kind of confused. Okay.
Yeah. So,
And each
and there's a lot of
succession planting. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways, and I tell you that what we're getting ready to try that, and this is why you just have to follow people and watch what they're doing. Jenny Love, who didn't start out as a no-till farmer, has just kind of migrated there these last few years. She has her beds. They don't even pull the crops out. They cut the crops with a lopper or a string trimmer, depending on what the crop is at ground level, leaving
Yeah.
the roots.
Right.
Then she rolls out really thin cardboard. Bio 360 would work exactly the same as this.
Uh-huh.
Just roll it out, and then you top that with a couple inches of compost, and then you just poke a hole and plant through it. And that way you're not really disturbing the soil at all. So that's just a new thing that I'm trying. But no, you do not rebuild the beds. You just add an inch or two to the top. But what you don't want to have happen, which I suffered from, and Jenny talks about it. She has really great blogs over on No Till Flowers,
Yeah.
um, and her podcast. But what happened to her happened to me. We had too much compost in our beds, and your plants just dry out super fast. So just be careful that you don't over add compost. So you're not rebuilding the beds. We've been ripping our crops out, and I'm toying with cutting them at ground level, adding laying down some Bio 360 and then topping it with a couple inches of compost as mulch to
Yeah.
hold the film down, and then just planting in it again and seeing and also putting fertilizer on the surface before we put the compost down.
That makes sense because I have clay soil like you, and those roots and all that organic matter are going to give the worms and stuff to work on,
Yeah.
and it'll
So that's,
soften the soil. Okay.
yes. So give that a try. And hey, thanks so much for coming up.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, ma'am.
All right. I'm going to invite Kay up to ask her question. Jessie, do you have any more?
I do. I have like 3 or 4 more.
Okay, why don't you go ahead while Kay is coming up. And Kay, if you'll mute yourself when you come up, go ahead, Jessie, ask your questions.
Okay, this is one from Amanda. She's wondering how to calculate how many seeds to buy. She's trying to factor in, germination, any kind of loss from bad weather, and she wants to get 800 transplants into a 100-foot row, and she's just wondering how much extra seed she should account for.
Sure, and that is a good question. And, I can still remember sitting down, especially when we were high production, you always did not want to run out of seed, right? We always purchased and then always started at least 20 to 30% more than I thought I needed to fill a bed. And when you're direct seeding, you buy more than that. You estimate higher than that because so many variables out in the garden. But 30% more. So if I wanted 100 transplants, I'd be starting 125 or 130 plants. Because there's always some that just are punier or some that don't germinate. And it's best to have extra plants left over that you can either find somewhere, as Dave Dowling would say, you just find somewhere to plant them and then sell the stems, or you can gift them, or you can, give them to one of your friends or something, or you can just compost them and they end up coming back to your garden through that way. So I think 30% more than what you need in plants. And then we always start 20% more seeds when we're starting transplants than plants that we actually need. Do you have any other questions? Go ahead, Jess.
Yeah, I do. Okay, so I have one related to soil and amendments and such. She said that she'd had her soil tested. This is Denise, by the way. She added her amendments and made beds that she topped with 3 to 4 inches of leaf compost. She wants to till the aisles then and put some of that dirt on top of the compost that she already added, and then put the Bio 360 on top of that. And she just wants to make sure that that sounds like the right process. She's a veggie gardener originally, so she's just wanting to make sure she gets it right.
Sure. Um, I've never done it that way. That certainly does not mean it can't and shouldn't be done that way. The thing that I would be cautious about is that to be certain that that leaf mold and or compost is truly completely cooked. We see a lot of people putting unfinished um, compost or leaf mold into their garden, into the bed portion, not the pathways. And then, the soil gets tied up helping that product finish its process. So I'd be really cautious about that. And surely you can till the pathways to loosen them up to be able to shovel more. I mean, that's just going to make a taller bed. And what you will learn if you're going to be using Bio 360 on the beds, that you are going to need loose soil in the pathway to cover the edge of the Bio 360. And there is a video of us making those beds. I mean, putting the film down on the product on our website, thegardenersworkshop.com. Just go to the Bio 360 and you can check that out. But that sounds like a good plan to me if your leaf mold is complete. So thanks for that one, Jesse. You got another one, and then we'll get Kay to ask her question.
Yep, I do. I have one more, and it is from, I think her name is Fionn, and she's in Ireland. And she says she's preparing winter beds at the moment that she's going to place a tarp over. She's in zone 9A, and her frost date isn't until December 10th. So she's preparing the beds, and she's wondering if she needs to go ahead and put the fertilizer on them now, or wait until she lifts the tarp off to actually plant. And so that was one part of her question, when to add the fertilizer. And then the other one was she was asking about Canterbury bells from the Cool Flowers book. She noticed that you didn't sell those anymore, and she was just wanting to confirm that you're not growing those anymore.
Both great questions. So if you're putting truly a tarp over the bed, I would definitely incorporate the fertilizer now. So, like those beds that we prepare now for very early spring planting, I mean, they are 100% finished. They are ready to be planted because it's likely going to be too wet at that time of the year for us. So, and if the bed is covered, and moisture is not leaching through it, the fertilizer is going to be sitting right there ready and waiting. So definitely I would do that now. Funny you should ask about the campanula. So the campanula that's in Cool Flowers, we love that campanula. We haven't grown it for several years because we found it to be the most incredible deer bait in on our farm. The deer would walk past literally hundreds of feet of snapdragons up in bloom to get to 5 feet of campanula and literally eat it to the ground. And so we just decided that it was just too much of a risk to grow it. But funny enough, I'm growing it this fall. And to add that note, the variety that I recommend people grow is Champion. And that's because it goes from seed to bloom in about 16 to 18 weeks, unlike many of the other campanulas that are truly biennials. They take a really long time, like plant them in June of this year and they will perhaps bloom next spring. So a much longer growing season. So the campanula can also, the champion, particularly, I haven't really experimented much with the others, is kind of difficult to start from seed. It's just got some special requirements. So I literally ordered plugs. And sometimes having a super good quality and size plug to put in the ground. I'm figuring out this now. Really helps people to be more successful. It has nothing to do with the deer, but sometimes those seeds that can be a little difficult to start, so they're slow growers most often. Um, that's part of our problem. But when we get order plugs in and you have a plant show up that's a nice size and it's healthy and ready to go, it just helps you. So I'd fertilize now, and I think Campanula is a great one, but you just need to definitely offer deer protection. So, Kay, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi,
Hi,
Lisa. Thank you so much.
you're
I have to admit,
welcome.
I'm out in my sunflower patch cutting pro cut flowers.
Awesome.
um, I just wonder, I am a new grower in 6B in Ohio, and I just seem to be more successful in markets, in farm markets, and they've ended for the season. And I just wondered, how long did it take you to be successful selling your sunflowers in, I don't know, grocery stores or in markets to be successful at it? Because it just seems like I can put them in bouquets and they sell really well at the market. I do have a stand at the end of my driveway. I live in a rural area, and I also wondered if you think that in some areas, sunflowers aren't the cat's meow.
Sure, those are all great questions, Kay. Thank you. So, in fact, when we were at farmers markets, we did sell the majority of our sunflowers in mixed bouquets, just like you are. And we did have a few customers that would buy straight bunches, but only when we had them prepared so they could see what they looked like. And also to make special note that it was not those huge sunflowers. It's the nice, smaller size, really opened the door for that. And then when we started selling to florist, we were already selling to florists. When I started growing sunflowers in such volume, it took me almost a year to get my florists who were buying tons of other stuff from us to get them to stop buying from wholesalers. And that, what I did is every single week I would put 2 or 3 bunches of sunflowers in their orders free. And it's like all of a sudden, one week they said, "You are so right. Yours last so much longer. They're so much more beautiful. Send us 10 bunches a week." So it took me time to do that. I think the big benefit of sunflowers at the farmer's market is, in addition to being in your mixed bouquets and those few straight bunches, is the display that they can actually add to your booth. You know what I mean? That wow color of a big old bucket of yellow faces looking there. So I don't know if
Right.
that helped you at all.
Yeah, it really, really did. And I've started to put my Lysianthus in, and that really was a wow factor. Everybody wondering what it was. I just want to compliment you because I did cool flowers. I was planting my seeds in October last year in the rain and just getting the seeds in the ground. And my neighbors thought I was totally nuts. But those were the longest stems of anything I've grown in the summertime. And so I just want to thank you for getting this cool flower idea back out to us. And this year I am trying to get started earlier because we're pretty wet here. And but I just, it's been like in the high 80s here. And so I'm kind of concerned it's too hot to germinate seeds.
Yeah, and you just really need to watch the weather and gauge your time. And so, thank you for those kind words. Yeah, cool flowers can change a flower farm and business for sure. So, thanks for coming up, Kay, and thanks for asking your question.
Thank you, Lisa.
All right, Jesse, do you have any more?
I just have one more, but
Okay, that'll
it's
end it for us.
okay. All right. So I don't know. This is something that was specific to your local area. There's a gal named Tori that's wondering if you can share your source for the truckloads of compost that you get.
Sure. So first off, compost is sold out. We would typically get it from the city. The city that I live in has a great composting facility, and they are currently sold out, unfortunately. And it's because of the increase in gardening interest through the pandemic. And so I would say that anywhere you could find it if you really need it. But that's kind of the case in a lot of areas right now. So I would definitely check your local municipality if they make compost, which we feel so fortunate that our city does it. I mean, it's an enormous cost to our city because it does not break even. But then I would check with any business that sells bulk mulch, typically will also sell compost. So I hope that helps. And this is really going to be the last one. Janet, I'm going to bring you back up here, and this is going to end it for us today. So we'll let Janet come up. Hi, Janet. You have another question for us? Hi, Janet.
Am I there?
You are there. Do you have another question for us?
Just a quick one. Okay,
Sure.
I was watching something that you did the other night, and you talked about how hard bells of Ireland are to get, how tricky they are. Would you just really quickly go through the steps from getting the seeds ready to getting them in the ground?
Sure. So, Bells of Ireland, we actually have that's one of our best germinating seeds outdoors in the garden. And I even forget where I learned this tip years ago from. But the seed does best if it is in the freezer for 2 weeks. Then you take it out of the freezer and then you soak it for up to 5 days. I mean, I have even sown Bells of Ireland out of moldy water before. Um, but what that soaking does is really softens the the hard outer shell, and that allows the little sprout that's inside there to actually break free. So we literally, I mean, I use one of those little colanders, a net, the metal ones. Pour my seeds in there so the water drips out, and then we always oversow. I sow 2 to 3 times the number of seeds that would be needed for one plant every 6 inches. And then I cannot remember if they get covered or don't get covered. I mean, I have to constantly reference the book. So I'm not sure if you do whatever they require, and then be sure to water them. And they do really, really well. We get an amazing stand of Bells of Ireland that way. Um, so, friends, thank you so much for joining us here. We went a little longer today, but that's okay because we really enjoy answering your questions. And this show was recorded. You're all invited to join the Flower Farmers Show, which is my closed Facebook group where I get a lot of the topics that I'm going to talk on here. Clubhouses are now slowly being added to my podcast. If you've not listened in, Field and Garden, you can find it on your favorite podcast app. And friends, just thanks for joining us here. And thank you, Jesse, so much for helping moderate and bring in those back channel questions to us. And so next week we have a super special guest, y'all. Val Shermer, who is the instructor of our new course, Forcing Bulbs, Indoor Winter Blooming Amaryllis and Paper Whites. Val is going to be here with us, telling us, just talking to us about these amazing, we all know amaryllis and paper whites are pretty amazing because they bloom in the winter and we just are so desperate for flowers, right? But she takes them over the top in the gardens that she creates. That's what she teaches you about in her course, as well as how to rebloom them for the next year for the amaryllis, what size you should buy. She offers resources, how to package them as gifts. I mean, it's just amazing. So Val will be joining us next week. And thank you all so much for being here today. And Jesse, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. It was a great discussion. Hope you all have a good day.
See you next week, folks. Ciao. All right, friends. I love connecting with you. I love helping you on this walk of growing flowers, selling flowers, building your business. And, you can learn more about my course as well as all of our flower based business courses. We have several, and the fall is when they typically enroll just once a year, with one exception. Dave Dowing's course enrolls in June. And, folks, we would love to have you join with us, to join with other like minded folks that want to build a business, that want to just get down to it. And so, friends, till we meet again, ciao.